Thank you very much, Mr. Kurshid, for participating in this interview. So I had some questions around data privacy in digital India. Now, digitally, India is evolving very fast, rapidly. The number of people with smartphones in India is predicted to reach about 500 million by the end of the year, according to some reports. This is incredible, actually, because considering that in 2012, there are only 25 million users. They've estimated internet users are approximately 500 million also in India. The Digital India campaign aims to transform the country into a digitally empowered society so that all citizens can reap the benefits of internet and technology. The government also has developed one of the most ambitious biometric identity systems called Aadhaar. Now, although Digital India has enormous potential to affect social change, and inevitably there are very many benefits with social media platforms being able to be accessed by all citizens. However, perhaps correspondingly, they also pose an equal challenge. In recent times, we've seen data breaches dominating global headlines, from Edward Snowden, who exposed mass internet and phone surveillance by the American intelligence, the famous Cambridge Analytica scandal involving the hijacking of users' data from Facebook, approximately 50 million Facebook users. This is also said to be an organization that has influenced US elections, even the EU referendum here in the UK, and even elections in India. Data privacy in this digital age has become a major concern, and naturally it's also become an important issue in India. In light of the Supreme Court's decision last year for fundamental right of privacy in response to concerns raised around the biometric identity card, what more, in your mind, in your opinion, can be done to ensure the fundamental right to privacy in India?
Well, I think this is an area that whatever ideas there are, both in terms of technology and in terms of constitutional positions, they've all been argued before the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. More or less the same Supreme Court as decided the privacy issues. And that judgment is now awaited on the Aadhaar card. Everyone expects that the Supreme Court will insist upon robust protection of privacy and of information, and therefore legislation for data protection that is still not there in India has been very clearly indicated by the government during the arguments that those data protection provisions will be put in place beyond what there is already. And I think everyone is awaiting that. The critical point, frankly, is where will the Supreme Court draw the line between what the state can share and what the state must not share. But more than that, what about the conscientious dissenter who says, I don't seek anything from you, and therefore I'm not willing to share data with you, with or without protection that that data might provide. Because at the end of the day, there are two issues. One issue is letting your data get into the hands of somebody that you do not wish to share your data with. And the other thing, of course, is the ability of the state to monitor what you are doing, because it has custody of your data. I mean, that's the problem that we have repeatedly over the years faced about telephone surveillance. That's the problem that we are now beginning to face, because for security reasons, surveillance cameras are placed in public spaces. No clear definition of the rights of a citizen there have yet been quantified by the courts. So I would imagine that the beginning of that process, and to what extent we will succeed in getting that, will become apparent when the Aadhaar judgment is pronounced, hopefully immediately after the summer vacation.
Thank you. And what would be your specific expectations or hopes in regard to this law? What would you hope to see manifest from the committee headed by B.N. Shri Krishna coming up with?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a series of things, but unfortunately for the average person, there is so much high technology in this that you're not always clear that what you really philosophically want to acquire, preserve, and prevent somebody else from interfering in is something that can be provided through technology. Now, country-wise, we've had issues with the United States of America, for instance, on the issue of metadata collection because of the use of internet services. How much of that metadata is available to a foreign government is a very critical question that's arisen, and I don't think that we've finally found an answer. There have been several rounds of negotiations, but I don't think we've found a final answer. But I think these are all issues that are in the pipeline and in the process of getting resolved. I am not quite sure that there is a kind of a manifesto prepared by public interested persons to say that these are the red lines that must clearly be drawn. People roughly know, vaguely know what the red lines should be and would be, but I think that there isn't yet adequate agreement on what exactly the red line should be. And I imagine that once the Supreme Court gives this judgment on Aadhaar, then further things will emerge from that. Discussions will happen, and then the lines will be a little clearer.
Thank you. The topic of data privacy often comes up in regard to election campaigns. And we've noticed that political parties are going more digital in their election campaigns, focusing on social media as an intrinsic core part of their campaign. Political parties in India have been accused of hiring companies like Cambridge Analytica to help garner votes. Going forward, how do you think voters can be assured that votes have not been the result of manipulation, and does this methodology not undermine the democratic process?
It certainly does. It certainly does. But I think we still have a lot of things to fix before we necessarily get involved in this. This is one level of voter influence, which we should certainly protect ourselves from. But there are more obvious and cruder versions of voter influence, and that's just misinformation, fake news. Mm-hmm. We haven't yet been able to get control on the issue of fake news. You can turn an election overnight by injecting into the space, public space, and making viral information that's contrary to the truth, and it's of no use that's then contradicted or corrected 4 days later or 5 days later. Things that we were dealing with in ordinary propaganda, ordinary methods of outreach and of information dissemination, in one way or the other, not very satisfactorily, but we were at least trying to do something about it. I think we have a fresh challenge now. How do you deal with something like disinformation during the election period? You can impose restrictions on television channels. You can impose restrictions on what the newspapers publish. You can restrict public meetings, or you can restrict press conferences in a particular period. You can impose restrictions on opinion polls or exit polls, and that could be of some significance. But what do you do with the internet? I mean, how do you control the internet in its different forms? I think these are big challenges that we haven't yet started working on.
Thank you. Last year, in response to the Supreme Court's decision for a fundamental right for privacy, the Union Minister for Information Technology, Ravi Shankar Prasad, he stated that even a fundamental right to privacy has its limitations. And him and the Finance Minister insinuated by the legitimate concerns of the state. What do you think of this statement? Are there limits to one's privacy, and how are those limits defined?
I think these are fundamental questions which have plagued us even in matters of public order. Where do you impose restrictions on freedoms, individual freedoms in the interest of society? And I think that I would not be wrong in saying that we've been a little generous in taking away rights in the interest of society and given society an overwhelming presence in the life of a citizen. I think that needs to be corrected. We are a maturing democracy, and just putting everything, a label of national security and public interest on everything, and then saying, so this is a no-go area, I think is something that we need to consider very seriously. I would imagine that beyond this government, in the life of a more liberal government, I hope that there will be serious thought given to this. We need to protect the citizen against any imagined wrong or an imagined hurt to society, which is very easy to impose, and which virtually opens the door entirely to take away all rights. I think the very people who in the past have objected to what we did to restrict rights of individual for the benefit of society, and what we did, and who protested about that for over 20 years, are today very happily going in that very direction. I think there is a self-correction required. Certainly we as a political format in a political party need to think very seriously about freedoms.
And the final question, if I'm going back to this decision last year, if privacy is a fundamental right, what does it mean for the LGBT community in India, or those, for example, who want to eat beef or consume alcohol, or how would that play out in terms of...
It goes further. I think it goes far beyond. People haven't yet reflected on it seriously. It's not just about the rights of people who are differently inclined. They are not just rights about what dietary habits people have, or preferences people have, what clothes they wear, what language they speak, what their living style is. But I think some fundamental questions that have been assumed for a long time have answers, will suddenly loom large. Personal laws, for instance. Personal law is just as much something that people want to do away with, because they want uniformity in the system for greater cohesion in society. But it might well be argued that if you do away with personal laws, you're also doing away with personal preferences. And does that sit pretty with the idea of privacy that we have? Of course, if somebody argued that personal law would be permissible so long as it's not imposed by the community, or it's not imposed by a particular head of the community, there may be ways of finding solutions and answers to that. Any kind of coercion or any kind of forced conduct or behavior by anybody against anybody would be obviously reprehensible. But where you do it willingly and you do it by consent and by choice, would another person have a right to interfere, to say the better view is that you should not be confined or you should not be restricted in this manner? There are fundamental questions about what does a liberal society require, that you can give choice, but then at the end of the day you cannot insist that the best choice should be taken. When will India begin to think about these things is difficult to predict, but I know that we will have to face that challenge one day.